Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone off the binary scale. I am Yu-Gi-Oh! We are back with another video, and today I want to talk about the absolute spiritual successor of Power Rangers SPD. And that is the first episode of Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity. It feels less like a beginning and more like the reopening of this familiar Power Rangers door. It hums with a really specific emotional frequency. And it's one that, like, tokusatsu fans will instantly recognize. It's that frequency of the order and organization in chaos, of people who are standing against this cosmic lawlessness of aliens who have migrated to Earth. And, you know, it's not just about a lone officer. It's more that that's just a role within a larger organization. These are the same emotional sort of beats that defined Power Rangers SPD as one of my favorite Power Rangers or even tokusatsu shows ever. And Gavan Infinity, in its opening moments, doesn't just echo these feelings, it inherits them, and it gives us a new take on them and proves itself to be, in my opinion, the most authentic spiritual successor to SPD that we never really got. So let's talk about the return of the cosmic police fantasy. At its heart, SPD was not just about the normal tokusatsu superheroes. It was about a law enforcement team in this universe where everything felt a little bit fragile. There was a previous team that went missing. The city that they operated in wasn't just like a normal Power Rangers type backdrop. It was a real city with real crime, and these villains of the week and the crimes that were committed felt unpredictable. SPD existed as a shield holding together a world that felt like it could very easily turn into a riot at any point in time. Gavan Infinity does its best to resurrect that exact atmosphere within the first couple of minutes of its episode. Its opening frames establishes a universe where the Space Sheriff organization, this new sort of SPD organization, operates within a space where there are multiple departments on multiple universe layers, so upgrading the space theme to multi-space theme, and then also has these quiet sort of black rooms of just, this is the secret team that gets things done. And I imagine each one of the Gavans that we will see later on in the show are going to be the leaders of their own team, but those together transforming heroes will make their own larger team later. So again, showing the importance of the individual officers, just like SPD does with the storylines of, hey, you can be a blue or you can be a red, but to be a leader of this team, you need to, you know, prove yourself as not only a ranger, but as a law enforcement officer in like a galaxy scale. SPD thrived on its fantasy of just being not only a regular law enforcement officer, not only being a tokusatsu hero, but also being a part of this system designed to protect the universe. And Gavan Infinity is now doing the same sort of infrastructure where there is someone at the top of command and there is oversight and responsibility to each thing that the Rangers have to do. And of course, they're not Rangers. Super Sentai ended to get this show started. But these sheriffs, these space sheriffs, they are, in my eyes, the closest thing we've got to SPD Rangers since SPD. And I know there's a big gap here. I'm not really talking about Deca Ranger, and that's because, honestly, personally, I've not seen enough of Deca Ranger to know if this is similar to Deca Ranger. I know that SPD was one of my favorite Power Rangers shows. I was a big Power Rangers fan and I watched a lot of Power Rangers, but with Deca Ranger, I sort of didn't come into Super Sentai around that era. So I've only gone back and watched a little bit of it and seen the crossovers with Q Ranger and the other Space Sheriff, but I don't really know Deca Ranger like that. So let's talk about some of these things that are different. I think one of the main things that is different about this show and SPD is in SPD, we had a sort of city that was critical to its identity. It was a familiar city that felt vulnerable and worth protecting. And it was this sort of home base for the SPD agents to just get in there and solve the crimes that were immediate to them every week. Gavan Infinity mirrors this sort of approach, but on a much grander and larger scale. We already know about these things called cosmic layers, which are the different universes that this space patrol, because it kind of is just a space patrol, just like SPD, operates within. It doesn't just operate as a space patrol within Gavan Infinity's world. It operates within Gavan Luminous's world, and it also operates within Gavan Bushido's world, which is, I believe, the world we just visited in this first episode. And I imagine there are plenty of aliens and plenty of alien planets within each one of these cosmo layers that we could potentially go to solve these crimes and do these things. It's like SPD on a much grander and larger scale. They have, in my opinion, managed to capture what was great about SPD and then say, hey, but what if this was a massive shonen type, larger world in which there are endless adventures to explore and endless storylines that we could inhabit in them. I don't feel personally like SPD was a limited show, but I do feel like it really heavily relied on its great character writing to push it forward. I think Gavan is going to have to do the same with great character writing, but it's not going to have to do the repetitive nature of its setting in order to limit that character writing. I do think that Gavan has this unique opportunity to tell these great, maybe even heartbreaking stories across the multiverse in a way that could be like central to the core of these characters, but not actually affect their everyday lives. And it's really, really, really cool to see that, because it's one of my major points that this mirrors what like the actual law enforcement officers of real life face. Now, I'm not a massive fan of the police, especially in lots of countries, but SPD feels more like a fantastical law enforcement officer that's not gonna, I don't know, pull you over for being so let's not glorify police officers, but one thing they do go through is they go through having to see these really traumatic events that could affect them emotionally, but then going back to their real life. You know, they have to then operate as a real person, have a family, have maybe, you know, a wife or a husband and a child and things like this, and just try to have a personal life away from all these traumas that they have to face on a daily basis. And I think a really cool mirror that's being held up here and was done to a slight degree in SPD, but can be done in a really good way in Gavan, is to see these universally like horrific things with the emotions that people are feeling and the Amorgias, and then the tragedies they use the Amorgias to commit, and then have to go back to their own universe. It's not even just go back to normal everyday life. They have to then leave the universe that they've gone to save. Because as we saw in this first episode, Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity, the Red Ranger technically, goes to the Silver and Blue Ranger's world. It goes to Bushido's world to solve an issue in Bushido's world. So again, they get to see this massively traumatic event, and then they have to come home. I want to conclude this with sort of the emotional resonance that this original video is about. This, to me, is what makes Gavan Infinity a true spiritual successor. It's not the nostalgia elements of, you know, the references to space and things like that, because again, I love Q Ranger, but I don't think necessarily Q Ranger alone was another SPD. You know what I mean? It's not quite that simple. It doesn't really rely on references alone like Q Ranger might. It recreates like the emotional conditions that make SPD meaningful. The sense of stepping into a duty, the sense of like, you know, wearing this authority, but also having the overhead above you, the pride of protecting others as a job, And like the understanding that being a hero is not about power, but it's about servicing the people that you need to save. You know, you are a service to this community, you're a service to this world, and now on a higher level, you are a service to the multiverse. These are the emotional pillars that I feel defined SPD, and now that define Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity's first episode. I'd love to see them expand upon this and hopefully go the way I think this show is going. But in order to get true clarity, I'm not sure until the next episodes come out. I won't necessarily 100% cover Gavan Infinity on this channel, as I love tokusatsu shows, but I normally tell my thoughts on tokusatsu shows in other people's channels like Keza Henshin's.
That was fast!
This guy is hard.
Or Film Form Studios.
Yu-Gi-Oh!
Or any of these other channels that you might hear my tokusatsu thoughts on. But I needed to say my piece on the start of Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity, because SPD is one of my all-time favorite shows ever, not just in the Toki space. And I really felt for the first time in a long time like I was watching that show again. It reminds me what it means to watch SPD for the first time. That sense of structured heroism, that belief in the cosmic order of things. It's a quiet reassurance that somewhere, someone is standing tall, ready to protect the universe. The justice that exists beyond Earth in this show, showing that someone is patrolling the darker edges of the universe, and the badge that you wear being someone who has to protect these people. In all these ways, Gavan Infinity is not just connected to SPD, it's its rightful heir. And I am happy, based on this first episode, to say, here's the chair, here's the throne, sit upon it for as long as you can carry this legacy. And I really hope when we get it to episode 2, I'm not disappointed and that this isn't just a fluke. But those are my thoughts on just episode 1. Hopefully we continue to get an incredible SPD successor. Those have been my thoughts. I've been Yu-Gi-Oh! Please like, comment, subscribe, and peace.